So, welcome to this segment of our spring fundraiser, Hope Blooms. I mentioned earlier, I'm Marianne, one of the co-founders of EricsHouse. And today we're having a conversation that many families experience, but few feel comfortable talking about openly. After losing someone to a stigmatized loss like a suicide or substance, grief comes with all those additional layers that I mentioned earlier. And many people bereaved by these types of losses find themselves asking painful questions like, what did I miss? What could I have done differently? And so many of us struggle to understand the why of why our person died. And so I know how heavy those questions can be. And I'm so happy that Jill McMahon is joining me today for this segment. Jill has been part of the EricsHouse mission for 10 years. She is a licensed professional counselor who specializes in grief and trauma. And she has worked with many grieving families, especially suicide loss survivors. Jill, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, my friend. Thank you so much for asking me. And I always love to sit down and have a good, meaningful dialogue between you and I. This is an important topic and one that we're very passionate about. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here.
So let me start with this. One thing that many families say is that these losses feel different than other losses. The grief that they're feeling is just very different. And I know that was true for me, but from your perspective as a counselor, why is that?
You know, I've always said, and you brought up, I love that you actually started with that question because it is so true. Like, what makes this loss different, and why does this community of people feel so alone? Right? Why do they feel the weight of the world on their shoulders, whereas you don't with several other losses? And I'm going to say, for me, the answer is really simple. It's guilt and shame. You know, I think most everybody that's viewing, I'm sure, has experienced some type of loss in their
Yeah.
life. And they know how heavy that is to work through, to manage, and then to move on from. But if you added guilt and shame to that level of pain, it only complicates that entire grieving and healing process that much more. And so I actually think that those that are impacted by a sudden loss, be it, you know, loss to substance or loss to suicide, they experience complicated grief, right?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
not traditional by any means.
Yeah. And there's always that question of like, what happened?
Right. Right. The
It's,
unanswered questions, right?
yeah.
But when somebody dies in a sudden manner this way, it
Yeah.
always leaves us with why
Yeah.
and what did I miss,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so that unanswered question, take yourself back and remember how long you asked yourselves, like, what didn't I see? Why on that day? Why at that time? Why not before?
Yeah.
What could I have done differently? And that is a part of the bereavement of suicide loss in particular
Yeah.
that other people just don't experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, and we work with so many families who also experience the
Mhm.
same thing, wondering how things could have been different. And honestly, I came to a point where I just would never know for sure
Mhm. Mhm.
what happened.
It's like trying to put a puzzle together that will always have a missing piece,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what you just said rings so true from my experience as well, Marianne. I have had hundreds of individuals sit on my couch, and it doesn't matter how much I try to rationalize with them about this death. They just have to wake up one day and place their feet on the ground and say, I'm okay not knowing. Because you'll never really truly know what
Right.
all of the events were that led our individuals to die on that day.
Yeah, exactly. And
Mhm.
that's hard for so many families to hear
Agreed.
because there's a little bit of a sense of like, not like pure abandonment, but why didn't my person come to me? Why
Yes.
didn't my person come and tell me he was struggling? Because if I had known, I could have saved him.
It's very complicated.
It really is. One of the things that comes up a lot in my conversations with families and in particular parents, there's a lot of shame. And shame, we always say shame really is such a natural, normal human emotion, but it's very destructive and it doesn't really belong anywhere in this equation of grief. And so, because of that, I find it's hard for people to be open about their loss and their loved one. And so important that we acknowledge that that's a natural, normal thing to feel, not for everyone, but for many. I think it's important to acknowledge that talking about it openly, talking about underlying mental health challenges and addiction, we create understanding instead of judgment.
And the more that we talk about the shame that is often felt after a loss like this occurs, the more we're normalizing our grievers' experiences, right? So they realize that they're not alone. So what you just said is really important. So I'm going to highlight it. Shame can be silent. And when our feelings are silent, we begin to isolate. And the very worst thing that you can do when you are in this enormous acute pain is to isolate yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the other thing that you and I have talked about relative to shame and the underlying stigma is that it's silent.
Yeah.
It's silent. It's not the kind of thing that we go around talking about.
You already feel like the world doesn't understand. You already feel like your loss is different than others.
Yeah.
But then when you begin to pull back, right? So first of all, nobody knows what it's like to be me. Nobody knows what it's like to have this experience. Nancy down the street hasn't lost a family member to an overdose. How is she going to be able to support me? Those are the narratives we tell ourselves, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
because
we feel it.
we're already coming from a space of isolation, and yet that takes me to another topic. When you're bereaved by alcohol, drugs, or suicide, people don't know how to respond to you, and that is another thing that kind of promotes staying isolated and being alone, which is, of course, the thing we don't want to do. So, what can you say to people that can, support them in supporting somebody who's bereaved with these losses? What can you say?
I think I want to speak to the supporter and I want to speak to the griever, right? So the inability or the not knowing what to say, that is only discomfort.
Mm.
That's all it is. It is discomfort.
Mm.
As we just said, there is a stigma, there is shame. We still haven't learned to accept these losses in our culture. And so out of that stigma is born discomfort. And because we feel uncomfortable and we don't know how to approach our coworker and we're afraid we're going to say all of the wrong things, we opt for not saying anything at all.
Yeah.
And that becomes so hurtful to the griever. Like, please, right? They just want you to say their loved one's name. So there's my advice to any support system, to any neighbor, to any family member, to any coworker, you name it. Say their name.
Yeah.
Talk about the loved one. Just because they have died does not mean that they never existed.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And especially immediately after the loss, because I remember, after we learned about Eric's passing, well, I found him, so we didn't just learn about it. We knew about it. All the family came in. It was complete chaos. I hardly remember anything, but there's one thing that I remember clearly. That is my sister. She came over and she changed all the sheets on all the beds.
Yep.
She never
Beautiful.
said a word. She just started changing the sheets quietly. And that night we got to go to bed and clean sheets, and it was really comforting. And so I'm just trying to convey that even the smallest thing that may seem nonsensical at the time really makes a difference, especially immediately after the loss.
I have known you a long time and I've never heard that story. So I love it. I love it. The one that I use often, just to piggyback on that, is I have a client whom said her house was revolving door after her husband died by suicide. And she was like, I was in no way, shape, or form capable of entertaining anybody.
Yeah.
So she remembers that a neighbor came over with a cooler of cold water bottles, and just kept replacing the bottles over a period of a week, so that when people came into the house, this survivor didn't feel like
Yeah.
they were empty-handed, right? That it was taken care of for them. It wasn't a what can I do for you or just tell me what to do. Instead, it's taking action and just doing.
So, Jill, for someone listening today who may be early in their grief after a loss like this, what helps people begin to heal?
Wow. I'm going to say first and foremost, don't rush it. Don't feel that there are steps that you need to follow, because having that expectation will only derail you. So sit with it and be okay with it, right? Take into account everything that Marianne and I have shared with you today. This is abnormal. It will feel out of body. But when you're ready, I'm going to highly suggest that you connect with other people that understand your pain. It's interesting because as a licensed professional, everybody always expects me, Marianne, to say counseling, 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 find a good therapist, find a trauma therapist. But I will be the first to say that I think actually sitting with a group of your peers is more beneficial than one-on-one counseling. Could you benefit from both?
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? But join a Facebook group if you can't leave the house. That's fine. If you don't want to talk about your grief, join a bowling group, a mahjong group, go hang out with your college roommates. Just whatever you do, try to avoid isolation because it can happen really quickly.
Yeah, and it can also lead to despair on top of depression, and that can really, keep you stuck in your grief.
It's a recipe.
Yeah.
And I know that you concur with this as well, because you and I have spoken about this several times. Talk about your person,
Yeah.
right? Just because the rest of the world may be uncomfortable talking about your person, and you and I just kind of explained why that is. It's maybe not ill-intentioned. It's probably most likely just discomfort or the inability to find the perfect thing to say. But by talking about your person, you're modeling that it's okay if other people talk about your person. It's also building a connection or maintaining a connection with your person, right? And be compassionate with yourself, Marianne. You and I both know that. First and foremost, don't have expectations. If you need to stay in your jammies for 10 days, stay in your jammies for 10 days. If you need to cut 25 people out of your life because you realize that they were, not the right people for you anyway, or they couldn't show up for you now, don't guilt yourself over that.
Yeah.
Cut them out.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to say replace self-judgment with self-compassion.
That phrase. Replace
Yeah.
self-judgment with self-compassion. It's perfect.
Yeah. And, I've mentioned that I have had a lot of losses in my life. And there is none of my losses, brothers, sisters, parents, grandparents, close friends. None of them changed me fundamentally at the core. But losing my son completely transformed me into a person people in my former life would never even be able to identify. And what that meant for me, Jill, was that I had to learn how to carry the loss while continuing to live.
Mm.
And in that moving forward, there is something beautiful that happens once we realize, hey, we can do this.
Mhm.
It's not what we asked for.
Mhm.
It's not what we wanted. We'd do anything for one more day, one more hug, one more kiss. We'd do anything for that. But we can do it. We accept what happened. We become reconciled with what happened, and that we're able to continue to live while we hold the loss. With that whole idea that love and grief, pain and sorrow, happiness and joy, they all live together.
Absolutely. And the tenacity and the resilience
Yeah,
that you prove to yourself and the world every single day just by waking up,
yeah,
right? I don't think we give ourselves enough credit
yeah,
for just completing the day to day
yeah,
after after our entire world has been turned inside out and we are traumatized to
yeah,
the very core of our being. And you just said it, you didn't ask for it.
yeah,
You don't want to do it. But I will say throughout time, if you just stop and you look inwards, take note, you are doing it.
yeah,
I think so many survivors, Marianne, do not give themselves the credit for
yeah.
the for surviving.
Well, right. And, it's because the bad days
Yeah,
feel so bad compared to a good day.
yeah,
And
agreed.
so when you feel like you're going backwards, you feel like, oh my God, you're starting this whole process over and over
Yeah,
again. Am I ever going to get better?
yeah,
But we don't give ourselves credit for having that good day, for taking that next step, for doing the one thing that day that gives us maybe a little bit of happiness or joy, going to the gym, cooking a favorite meal.
yes.
Um, and the other thing I try to encourage our people is to accept the wisdom that they gain in
Hmm.
this journey every step of the way. Every step, they gain more wisdom about what they're feeling, who they are, how they're going to integrate the loss, how they're going to live with the loss and carry the loss. And we forget that part of this is learning how to live
Yeah,
under circumstances that we didn't want or ask for. I am always asked what advice I would give someone who just lost somebody to either alcohol or drugs.
yeah.
Um, and would it be okay if I just shared my perspective on that?
I would love it if you did, please. I think that would be
Um,
very powerful.
Sometimes we believe that our love for our person is enough to save them or keep them alive. And in many cases, it is. But in my case, and I know in the case of many other people, um, it didn't have anything to do with our love. Our love is still there. It's still strong. It's eternal. And had we known, we would have done everything we could do to save them. But in that moment, we didn't have the power. We didn't have the power to save them in that moment. And so, if we're able to recognize that um, our person was struggling and was just lost hope and was unable to stay another day, then we can accept that that is what happened in our life and that we can continue to love them even with all of their struggles. We can continue to love them, and that as we begin to get better and feel better, we we transition from that physical relationship to a spiritual relationship, and certainly
Mhm.
one of memory. And um, I feel like when we accept that, we invite ourselves to mourn our loved one
Mm.
in very authentic ways.
I always say that I believe that this disease be it addiction or depression, those are both diseases, oftentimes is bigger than we are.
Yeah.
And so all the love in the world can try to hold it off and can try to fight it, and sometimes it wins, and sometimes the monster is
Yeah.
just bigger than we are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I always like to say, and it's the same with all of our people, Eric was so much more than the way he died. He was a son, a brother, a hilarious big belly laugh kid who really mattered to our family. He really mattered. And I share this story with people because I know there are other people out there that carry the same pain of loss and sometimes feel the same complex emotions, guilt, regret, stigma. And if you're one of those people, I want you to know that you're not alone and that your love for your person did not fail. And together, by talking openly about these losses, about mental health, about addiction, we can replace stigma with compassion and help families that need to find their way through the wilderness of grief. And so, thank you all, if you're listening, thank you all for being part of this conversation and helping us make a difference and helping us carry our love forward to help others. So, thank you. But, Jill, let's talk about bulletproof.
Ugh. You're so sweet. So we've known each other for a while, and I have been a post-vention specialist or a suicidologist for 20 years. And just very recently, I combined two of my passions, which is gun violence healing
Mhm.
and suicide bereavement, because there really is an intersection between the two. So what I started to realize in my work, and it's been backed up by research, is that 57% of gun violence episodes in this country are by firearm suicide. And so I've written a book for those that are impacted by gun violence in any way. So it can be somebody who's witnessed a gun violence event, it can be an EMT, it can be, I use several examples in my book of individuals that I consider first responders. So that could even be a news reporter that responded to Uvalde. It can be a mom whose child was a part of a school shooting event in high school. And I share the story of a family that I worked with whose dad took his life by firearm and how it changed their lives in all of the ways that we've just discussed for the last 41 minutes, my girl, my friend. Like it's all of the things. It's feeling confused, it's feeling isolated, it's feeling misunderstood, it's the should have, could have, would haves. And so I've just recently put that out into the world. That's kind of what I'm doing today. But my heart lies in suicide healing, gun violence healing, and following in your shadow as you go to touch as many people as you can.
Well, tell us how we can get your book.
You're so sweet. It's on Amazon. It's Bulletproof Healing After Gun Violence and Trauma, and barnesandnobles.com. It's, it's your traditional, you can find me, jillmcmahoncounseling.com. You can visit my website. If anybody who listens to this has any additional questions for me, Marianne knows I'm very open. I'm very approachable. Send me a note. Or if you have a situation and you're like, is this normal? What are we experiencing? What do you suggest that we do? I'm going to suggest that you reach out to EricsHouse, but please feel free to reach out to me as well. I love connecting with others. So jillmcmahoncounseling.com.
Thank you so much, Jill. And
Um,
for others, please read Jill's book. I haven't read it myself, although I purchased it. And I'm going to be doing that over the summer in like an actual hard copy. So it's not going to be like an electronic version, which I haven't done that in years. So it'll be fun to do that. But please read her book. The wisdom and insight that she has to impart is really very much life-changing. And if you're interested in learning more about EricsHouse, you can find us at ericshouse.org. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us today. And we love you. We love you. And thanks for
You.
being here.